In ancient Israel, sacred words got written down without the neat structure modern readers expected. A book did not arrive as a stack of numbered pages. It travelled as a long scroll, copied by hand, line after line, until the end. The earliest followers of Jesus also wrote letters and stories this way, then copied them again and again. Nothing in the ink said chapter 1 or verse 3. The text simply kept going. That fact changed everything about how people found their place. They did not flip to a reference, they recalled it. A community learned the rhythm of key passages through repeated public reading, and people carried the wording in their heads. Teachers pointed to a well-known moment in the story, or to the start of a famous speech, and listeners knew where that lived. Memory and shared habit did the work that Numbers later promised. Even when Christians began using codices, early book forms that looked more like bound pages, the basic problem stayed the same. Without fixed coordinates, you could not quickly prove a point by citing an address. You had to describe the passage or read until you reached it. Writers and readers leaned on broad breaks, natural turns in a story, a new topic in a letter, a change in speaker. It worked, but it depended on people staying close to the whole. Jewish scribes faced a practical problem. Sacred words had to be read aloud accurately and copied without drift. So they began adding quiet signals on the page. They left spaces where a thought ended. They grouped lines into small paragraphs. These breaks did not change the words, but they changed the experience of finding them. Reading became less like guessing the next turn and more like following a mapped path. Over time, those signals grew more deliberate. Scribes marked larger section boundaries used in synagogue reading, later known as parashot, places where the public reading paused, resumed, and kept its rhythm week after week. That helped communities stay synchronized. It also helped copyists check their work, because a missing line often ruined the pattern of breaks. The text still flowed, but it flowed with visible stepping stones. But these aids stopped short of a true address system. One scroll's spacing did not always match another's. A section marker told a reader where to breathe, not how to cite. People still located passages by saying what happened there, or by naming a well-known opening phrase. The page offered guidance, not coordinates. The Bible gained navigation cues, yet it still lacked universal chapters and numbered verses. By late antiquity, Christian books circulated more widely, and the problem of finding a place in the text felt sharper. Manuscripts increasingly carried headings at the start of works, and short titles that signaled what followed. Some copies even gathered book lists, helping readers confirm what belonged together. These additions did not create chapters and verses, but they pushed Christian reading in a new direction. Navigation started getting built into the page. The biggest pressure came from the 4 Gospels. They told the same life from different angles, and readers wanted to connect them. That need produced a new kind of tool. A scholar named Eusebius of Caesarea developed a cross-referencing system that linked matching scenes across Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It relied on numbered sections and a set of tables, later called the Eusebian canons. With the canons, a reader no longer depended on memory alone to compare accounts. A number in the margin pointed to a table, and the table pointed back to parallel passages in the other Gospels. The effect was practical and profound. Separate books started behaving like one connected network. Christians had begun designing manuscript features for a specific purpose, locating the same event in different texts, quickly and reliably. In the early Middle Ages, a new pressure built inside the Latin Christian world. Teachers, students, and church leaders needed to point to the same place in Scripture quickly, and older cues were not enough. Into that need stepped scholars who began dividing the Bible into larger, repeatable units. One name stood out: Stephen Langton, an English churchman and master in the schools, who helped popularize a chapter pattern that closely matched what many Bibles used later. This chapter system mattered because it turned a long book into a mapped book. A passage no longer depended on memory or a vague description. It had a stable stopping point. That stability fit the growing university culture, where arguments moved fast and texts had to be shared across many hands. Students could follow a lecture, copy notes, and check the same section later. When a scholar cited a chapter, others could actually find it. The system then travelled the way ideas often travelled, through training and through the pulpit. Preachers who learned in the universities carried the chapters into sermons, and listeners heard scripture presented in clearly marked chunks. As more manuscripts adopted the same breaks, debates became sharper and quicker. People did not just discuss what the Bible said in general. They fought over what a specific chapter held. A common framework made scripture easier to reference and harder to evade. Once the chapter system took hold, it solved one problem and exposed another. A chapter still covered a lot of ground. If a preacher needed one exact sentence, chapter 3 narrowed it down, but not enough. In classrooms and pulpits, people had to find the same spot again and again, fast. The pressure came from use: more reading, more quoting, more arguing. And the old chapter labels started to feel blunt. So readers reached for smaller handles. They broke chapters into short sections, marked lines in the margins, and used the first few words of a passage as a kind of nickname. Lists appeared that matched themes or key phrases to rough locations. Some books carried lettered parts inside a chapter. Others used running headings to keep place. None of it looked the same everywhere, but the direction stayed clear. People needed a way to land on a single point. That need grew sharper as scholarship expanded. Teachers compared copies. Commentators built arguments line by line, and public disputes turned on tiny details. A claim sounded stronger when it came with a precise location and weaker when it felt vague. Sermons also changed. They moved from broad readings to tightly targeted proofs. Chapters helped, but they did not end the hunt. They set the expectation that scripture could be indexed, and that expectation demanded finer and finer reference. By the 1500s, chapters had made the Bible easier to navigate, but they still left a problem. Too much lived inside one chapter. Scholars and preachers needed a way to point to a single sentence without circling around it. In that moment, a French printer and editor named Robert Estienne, also known as Stephanus, pushed a simple idea into the text itself. He numbered the lines. Estienne's verse numbers did not stay a private tool. They travelled with printed Bibles, page after page, edition after edition, until readers began to expect them. The numbers created a shared map that did not depend on memory or local custom. Now a person could name a place in Scripture the way someone gave an address. Book, chapter, verse. No guessing, no wandering. That one change reshaped how Scripture got used. A preacher could quote a specific line and send others straight to it. Debates could hinge on a single numbered sentence. Ordinary readers could memorize shorter units and retrieve them quickly, even years later. The Bible became easier to point to carry in the mind, and to repeat with precision. The text stayed the same, but access changed. Printing changed the scale of everything. Once presses turned out Bibles in huge numbers, the new chapter and verse address system stopped being a specialist tool and became the normal layout on the page. Protestant printers used it to standardize editions, and Catholic printers did the same to keep pace. The same structure appeared again and again until readers expected it everywhere. The Bible started to look indexed. Then came the shift that mattered most. More people read in their own language. Vernacular Bibles moved scripture out of classrooms and pulpits and into homes, markets, and small gatherings. And because the numbering matched across editions, a reader could open to the same chapter and verse as someone else. Finding a line no longer depended on training. It depended on knowing the numbers. That simple layout rewired how ordinary readers used the text. People followed sermons with an open Bible, checked whether a quotation matched the page, and compared different translations line by line. Disagreements became more specific because they stayed anchored to a shared reference. A passage could be debated without a scholar acting as a guide. Chapter and verse turned reading into a group activity that anyone could join. Once chapter and verse numbers became the normal way to find a passage, they also became the normal way to think about it. Readers no longer had to follow a whole argument to reach a line. They could jump straight to an address. A sentence that once leaned on what came before now sat alone on the page, boxed in by numbers. And a quick quote started to feel like the whole point. That shift quietly changed habits. Verses got lifted out and repeated like slogans, shared in sermons, debates, and private devotion. The number made it easy to carry, but it also made it easy to detach. Meaning, which used to build across a paragraph, could flatten into a single punchline. People quoted the part that sounded strongest. They skipped the lines that softened it, qualified it, or aimed it somewhere else. Chapter breaks did something similar, only bigger. A new chapter sometimes landed in the middle of a scene, an argument or a poem, and the break suggested a fresh start even when the original writing kept moving. These later seams started guiding interpretation. Theology and doctrine grew around where the text appeared to stop and start. And the flow that once carried readers forward sometimes disappeared behind the numbering that helped them find it. Modern readers inherited a Bible that felt like it came pre-cut into tiny pieces. But scholars and translators increasingly pushed back. They tested layouts that treated each book more like a book again, with paragraphs, headings that followed the argument, and long stretches meant to be read in one sitting. Some editions even removed verse numbers from the main text. The goal sounded simple: let the story and the logic reconnect. This shift produced a new kind of Bible on the market, the so-called Reader's Bible. It kept the words, but changed the experience. Without constant numbers interrupting the lines, narratives moved faster and speeches sounded like speeches instead of stitched quotes. Poetry looked like poetry, yet the old system refused to disappear. People still needed quick reference for sermons, study groups, and footnotes. Convenience pulled one way, continuity pulled the other. Publishers and scholars then faced a practical question that carried real consequences. When did numbering help, and when did it quietly rewrite the meaning? In some places, verse breaks clarified structure and made careful comparison possible. In others, they invited readers to treat a single line as the whole point. So modern editions experimented with compromises, tiny verse numbers, numbers in the margins, or none at all until the end of a paragraph. The argument stayed alive because the stakes stayed high. By the time scripture reached the modern world, the numbers had stopped feeling like a tool and started feeling like the text itself. A reference like John 3:16 worked anywhere, in any language, in any country. It let a preacher point a whole room to the same line in seconds. It let strangers on opposite sides of the globe talk about the same sentence and mean the same place. Then the digital age pushed that system even further. A chapter and verse became a link. One tap pulled up the passage, compared translations, and jumped to cross-references. Search bars rewarded exact addresses. Sermons and study plans leaned on that speed, and conversations online moved in tiny, shareable units. The Bible became more reachable than ever, but it also became easier to consume in pieces. And yet, alongside all that precision, a quiet counter-movement grew. Many readers wanted to hear whole arguments, not just highlights. They reached for editions that softened the numbers, grouped thoughts into paragraphs, and invited longer stretches of reading. The contrast stayed sharp. It began as unnumbered scrolls heard continuously, and it ended as a universally indexed Bible, powerfully accessible and constantly at risk of being broken apart.